Well, this is such an incredible pleasure to be here with you tonight. And Charlie Driscoll actually made a comment earlier about how nervous he was standing up in front of you as a peer. Well, think about me. I'm up here, and you guys really know this stuff. So I'm trying to bring some of my ideas into an incredibly eminent group. But very cool, a lot of friends, and so many of you that I've met over the years and recently, and as well as in past histories. And so it's really been fun the last, I don't know, maybe 36 hours that I've been here. Steve mentioned that I am a biogeochemist by training, and so as we were listening to the legacy discussions today, one of the points about the seminal works that have come from Hubbard Brook, and of course, starting my PhD process in 1977, biogeochemistry of a forested ecosystem really became my Bible, and it was an incredible piece of work to have at hand and to be able to really use all the information that was coming out of Hubbard Brook. But the other thing that Gene Likens mentioned in his remarks was we all have a favorite data set. I don't know if mine's a favorite data set, but it's a favorite set of information about acid rain, because it was because of the work here that my career started in 1982, being part of what was called the NAPAP program, the National Acid Precipitation Assessment Program. I know several of you in this room I funded, because I remember those A deliverables, for those of you who were part of that. Sorry, that's an inside joke for those who, but it was an incredible time, and there were acid rain wars, but we were actually established through that NAPAP program, and one of the few times where Congress actually supported a long-term investment in a set of science to help influence a policy decision. And I think it was very rewarding for all of us who participated in that. So thank Hubbard Brook for multiple things, both in terms of helping my career and my own path to my PhD. And of course, the ecosystem study has really created and continues to create, as we've been hearing all day long, a tremendous legacy for all of us to follow. So the challenge for me is to speak at the end of a very long day, after dinner, although noted no beer or wine, so that's probably good for me. You probably were all ready for that. But also to maybe say a few things that are thoughtful and inspiring, challenging. And so I come here, I am not going to repeat the Hubbard Brook story. I can't possibly do that. You've heard the best, the experts talking about that. But to try to weave some of the issues and the challenges we're having at USDA and maybe across just in general in the global community that deal with environmental issues and the huge challenges that we're facing, and speak to how not only how the Hubbard Brook ecosystem study, but also studies like that can help contribute to the answer. And to start that, I'm going to give us a context. This is the downer slide, unfortunately. But this is the reality that we're going to be living with. And so leaning into that, to use some current terminology, I think is really important for us to think about this real context and the reality. Probably first and foremost is 9 billion people by 2050. We are clearly on that trajectory. That is the reality. That's developing countries that want to become developed. That's areas of the world that need to be stabilized by being able to provide food and nutrition and water. And so how do we address that? And a lot of the discussions that we are having at USDA is how do we in our world contribute to that goal? But we have these other challenges that are facing us too. The amount of land that's highly degraded, this intersection between disease outbreaks and human health, and the crossover from animals and other rare events that are contributing to challenges in human health. And absolute water scarcity, the challenges we have in water. It's always so lovely to be in northeastern US because there's a lot of water here of different types. But we all know that the allocation of even abundant water is not necessarily going to where it's needed the most for the different purposes that we have. And then the big one, the uncertainty brought by climate change. A little bit more certainty, a little bit more clarity that I think has been coming out recently, and certainly we're all looking forward to the next IPCC as well as the National Climate Assessment. But this is the world that we're dealing with. These are the parameters that we have to be thinking through. And so how do we do that at a global scale? At USDA specifically, we are very aware of trying to bring these linkages together. And for me in particular, as a systems thinker, to know that we're not just thinking about each of these sectors independently, but how do you bring food, water, and energy integrated way, not only nationally but globally, and how do we think about those pieces? And so I do want to just mention one thing that's happened globally, because it's so important to us as scientists. It's come out of the agricultural community, but it has its precedent in the forestry community. Now, imagine some of you are familiar with IUFRO, the International Union of Forestry Research Organizations, a wonderful place for those of us in the science of natural resources that brings the entire community globally in forests together on a regular basis. It's a forum for exchange. More importantly, it's a forum for the leaders of forestry research to get together to share their trials, their tribulations, their successes. And having been in that chair for a few years, I've valued my ability to meet with other chief scientists of other countries to talk about our challenges and our successes. Agriculture, R&D, has no such thing. And I think one of the biggest issues that my undersecretary, the chief scientist, Dr. Catherine Wotecki, who, actually I should have said that before, she's really sorry she's not here. I'm really happy she's not here because I'm here instead. But she really did want to share her regrets because she really wanted to see the site and to be part of your celebration. At the G20 meeting that took place last year, she led a group of the meeting of agricultural chief scientists of all the G20 countries, plus 7 developing countries, including Africa and Southeast Asia. And she led that on behalf of the community, but they ended up as a group agreeing to meet regularly. Now think about it. These chief scientists of the big countries of the world that produce agricultural products have never met before. To be able to do that. And then what are the common science infrastructure issues that they should be working together on? They didn't want to get into the themes because right away you get into political issues, there's lots of controversies, but everybody could agree on an infrastructure of science delivery that made sense. So I wanted to share that with you because I think this not only speaks to agricultural R&D, but it is actually, I think, something that all of us can be thinking about as scientists in the global community. Things that we take for granted in the United States, like open access to scholarly publications. It's really easy for us to get access to pubs out there, but not everywhere. And to be able to share and have not only the public sector, the society journals that many of us pay dues for and get free afterwards, but also the pay-as-you-go type publications. And so this is now open access to scholarly publications, many of you know, is a presidential initiative. The G8 countries have bought into it, and so we are now having to move forward with that aspect. Also open access to different types of data and to really make our data freely available, accessible through the web to all countries, to all people, to be sharing and learning from that. For us specifically in agriculture, this whole idea of open access to germplasm, we have in the United States through our national germplasm centers, we actually have the original seed germplasm that created all of the different varietals that led to corn, led to soybean. I mean, things that we take for granted how much we have out there, but if you go back to the original germplasm materials, as we think about resilience to climate change, how do we share this and how do we really mine that germplasm to be anticipating the issues that we have in the future? Same thing with open access to genetic and genomic information. We're collecting a lot of genome information. We've been mapping the genome of lots of different species, lots of different important commodity crops, sharing that, or getting that to really, again, freely available. And then finally, having a regular meeting of chief scientists. So except for the ag R&D part of the chief scientist, these other features, I think, are things that we, not only in agriculture, but natural resources, in ecology, and in science in general, I think we need to be thinking about as we consider the global problems in a global community. But now coming down to something closer to, perhaps closer to this home, and that is natural resource questions. We really have a lot of the same large challenges I just mentioned in a global scale are also coming home in the areas that we're talking about, and a lot of these have been shared. So I just wanted to reinforce the issues around climate change, of course, is something that we are beginning to think about in terms of adaptation and mitigation strategies. How do we build those into our programs and profiles? The President's action plan was mentioned by Fred Krupp earlier. I'm really pleased that our secretary actually anticipated that action plan by a week and made an announcement about what USDA is going to be doing in response to climate change. And one of the areas is getting our science, operationalizing our science is what the phrase he uses, but being able to take what we have learned from 30 years of research and moving into use by foresters, ranchers, and farmers. Large-scale disturbances, we've been hearing about that in many of the discussions today. Lots of open space, whether it be conversion to agriculture or more frequently now conversion to hardened surfaces, and how do we manage with that, or how do we mitigate and really reverse that trend. The challenging economics that we're facing, not only in terms of being able to invest in decisions, but also investing in science. And we can talk more about that, but even as the country is making big investments in science, it's going to National Science Foundation, NIH, NIST, and DOE Office of Science. Some of the programs that we're involved in are not, in fact, getting invested nearly to the same degree. And then it's the public, whether engaged or disengaged. And we've heard a lot about communication and how we take our science and move it into the public. So those ideas and those thoughts and those challenges, I think, are what we're trying to build into our practice and be much more concrete about it. And I just thought I'd throw out this concept too about some of the changes that have taken place from the 20th to the 21st century that I think really brings to me a sense that we're thinking and we're moving in the right direction. And that is looking at things in an integrated way, being able to put sustainability in a premier spot as the overall goal, if you will, of what we're trying to do. Thinking about uncertainty as part of the way we do business, not as an exercise. And then really being able to connect better rural and urban systems. And since we're talking about water a lot today, I've told a few other people earlier that the Forest Service RPA assessment in the last round identified that 87% of our surface-derived drinking water comes off our farms and our forests. And so stewardship of those lands is incredibly important. We should be able to connect the dots back to the public on how valuable these lands are, the management of these lands, even as we have working landscapes, because they are contributing water. And how do you value that? And so a lot of what I see, the changes that have taken place, are making these connections. It is a systems approach to a whole lot of different things. It's looking at the landscape scale in a much more deliberate way, especially conservation practices, land management practices, of actively incorporating watershed thinking and landscape thinking into decisions, connecting the science, taking new approaches and new technologies and being able to adapt and adopt them very quickly. And in fact, I was out on a couple watersheds looking at the new sensor arrays out there, and I'm like, this is wonderful, this new technology, rapidly deployed, getting a lot of data that in real time that will help answer a lot of questions in a different way than we might have in the past, and as well as maybe not dragging people out and how much time you have to spend in the field as you do those collections. And then what I really like to see, and what it has increased, is connecting people to science in a whole lot of different ways. National Science Foundation has really pushed this hard with their education and outreach and their grants. We're trying to do this and operationalizing our science and our cooperative extension. But it's pulling all the different pieces together in a much more deliberate way. Which brings me to Hubbard Brook. Because this really is, all of those components about connecting that I just talked about, is the legacy that has come from this site, this research, and all of you who have been working here. It is really one of the birthplaces. It is one of the starting points of truly thinking of watersheds in an integrated way, not just how the land connects to the water, but bringing in all the different components and increasing the understanding the complexity of these sites. And that idea of watersheds as an organizing framework has really driven our science in so many different places. And it really is a legacy that you've all talked about today. Again, I'm not going to amplify it very much more, except that it is something that I think is being emulated around the country in multiple disciplines, and perhaps around the world as other countries and other locations realize that this is a way to get a lot more understanding about the systems that we're living in. And so let's think about a little bit more of the legacy. And this is another version of that wonderful map back there, but it has one additional piece. This is the map of the U.S. Forest Service experimental forests and ranges, which is back there. It also includes the ARS watersheds and research sites, which I heard somebody say, you know, there's a big gap in the middle of that map. Well, if you include ARS, in fact, there is no gap for USDA. We really do have this continuum of sites from forests to farmlands to rangelands. And it gives us this tremendous capacity of long-term research in many places to be able to start telling more integrated stories. And as we've talked about with the Forest Service a few years ago, for example, looking at sugar maple decline, not at one site, but actually in the transect from Maine with the Penobscot through Hubbard Brook to Kane to Furneaux, and being able to look at that entire ecosystem, we got a lot more information looking across those sites as any individual site alone. And so this evolution of the legacy of Hubbard Brook as a place and a set of watersheds to multi-watersheds and multiple landscapes, what are the fundamental truths, what are the foundational stories that we can start telling about those sites? And the good thing about the experimental forests and ranges is the original one was 1908. There's been some tremendous data sets that exist. One of my favorites is in Priest River, Idaho, where they have daily weather records since 1911. I keep thinking that is a tremendous resource. Where else do we have those kinds of things? So how do we take advantage of this and these types of data to talk about the long-term stories? Agriculture, curiously enough, given that it's really probably been around longer than forestry, did not have that system. Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I was supposed to mention smart forests. I did sort of indirectly. But it's this, taking advantage of those sites to really bring these kinds of new technologies and the cyber infrastructure. Part of what we've learned, I think, is the ability to measure these sites at real time across different locations is a very powerful thing. So kudos to Forest Service and all the cooperators to be bringing in the smart forest concept. And so getting to agriculture. We don't have the experimental forests network, and until recently, where we established the long-term agroecosystem research network, ARS identified these 10 initial sites that I've identified here as their initial tranche of locations to do the same type of thing, but for agricultural and range systems. Clearly copying off LTER with a great deal of respect. Taking advantage of the fact that 2 of these sites are NEON sites, and in fact, for those of you who don't know, just under 40% of the NEON footprint is USDA. So we're a big believer in being a good landlord for the NEON program. But bringing all these pieces together, I mean, LTER is the network of watersheds, the LTAR, the NEON program. What can that start telling us about these ecosystems under these very, very complex situations? And so we're very hopeful that the LTAR whole complex can take off. And their focus initially is really 2 areas. One is climate change and integrating across those sites, but the other is sustainable intensification. Remember there's 9 billion people under water scarcity. What can we do building on our agricultural science with all the information we have about germplasm and genomics and good processes and good agricultural cropping systems and the variability we have out there to do a better job at producing the food that we need, even as we have conservation values maintained. It's a big job, and it's one that we're, I think, really excited about pursuing and hope we will expand this network. In fact, I think there's a new RFA that has come in, and we'll probably have another set of sites that we'll be looking at. What I'd like to see, frankly, is then now connecting these ag sites to the forest sites and having a much more integrated program. Another thing that is out there, another concept that we've talked a little bit in today's sessions, but I think is still in its nascent stage, is the whole area of ecosystem services. And not only quantifying them, which I think we've actually done and doing better, and I think we have some very good data and very good studies that have gotten to that. But then how do you take these services and create markets out of it? The discussion with Fred Krupp was about carbon markets. But actually right now where the action really is in water markets. And their water markets have shown up all over the place. Some of them are science-based, not all of them. In the USDA, we have an Office of Environmental Markets that is there. It was established by the Farm Bill in 2008 to begin developing the standards and the guidelines that if you really went into an environmental market system, what would you need to be able to do it in a way that has both economic security for those who are trading, but also meets the standards of a true marketplace in terms of the service that you have out there. And so water markets, I think, is one that we're really excited to see how that's developing. Soil health is another one that is coming out of the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And in fact, for those of you who deal with land management on the application side, and you have not looked at NRCS's Conservation Innovation Grant Program, really strongly encourage you to do it. It is a way to do very creative things on ecosystem services, on carbon trading, on establishing different types of conservation practices. So we're really, I think this is another part of the future that we need to deal with. It's one that, from the standpoint of a land manager or a farmer, let's getting to even the local scale, gives that landowner another stream of, another economic source to stay on the land, to keep that land in open space, and to get another product that actually has a goods and service that can be, in fact, part of an open system. And then the last idea I want to throw out there, which probably brings it all together, is our thinking about a landscape of the future. From a Department of Agriculture standpoint, where we have 16 agencies, and that means that we go from statistics to the research on both economics as well as processes, to rural development, to a whole lot of other nutrition programs and food safety. It's the whole food complex and agricultural complex. But recognizing that we have got to start operating more in a way that integrates our world with the forestry and natural resources world, with the water world, with the energy world. It goes back to my second slide, I think, which was the food, water to energy nexus. And how do we do that? Well, we need to start thinking of landscapes at a much larger scale. What's not as connected in there is the connection from that rural to urban landscape, because that feedback mechanism has got to be there. That knowledge connection has got to be there, because 80% of the people who live in urban areas need to also value these landscapes as something that they need to treasure and interact with. So to me, this is a really interesting concept. It's not originating with me. In fact, I hope Forest Trends, Scientific American is the reference for this, but Forest Trends actually has done quite a bit with this. EcoAg Partners is another group that's done a lot with this whole idea of farm of the future, landscape of the future. But connecting this landscape from farm to forest, to seeing them as an integrated whole. And that's where a lot of these long-term studies actually, I think, could help us, because we are working at a scale that provides information that I think really helps us think about where this land is going in the future, where we are going into the future, and how do we have productive agricultural systems for those 9 billion people, even as we have water of quality and quantity for all of us out of those same lands. No small task, but I think we've got a lot of the science basis and the systems to allow us to get there. And I believe that is it. Yes, it is. So thanks very much, and I tried to keep this not too long so that there was some time for discussion or questions, or everybody can go have a beer.